She was 23 years old, a widow, alone on a frozen homestead in Wyoming territory with a rifle in her hands and enemies circling like wolves. Someone had murdered her husband and made it look like an accident. Someone was stealing her cattle one by one. Someone had strung up 3 dead coyotes on her property line as a warning. You are prey now. But Clara Matthews refused to run. Then a giant stranger rode out of the mountains. A man built like a mountain with hands that could crush a skull and eyes the color of honey in sunlight. He killed 3 outlaws before breakfast and offered to buy her cattle at double the price. He said he wanted to help her. He was lying, because her dead husband had secrets. Secrets worth $50,000 in stolen gold. Secrets that had put a target on her back. And the giant cowboy hunting her enemies was hiding the darkest secret of all. What happens when a widow with nothing left to lose meets a killer with nothing left to live for? What happens when the only person who can save you is the same person who might destroy you? And what happens when he whispers those words that change everything? Relax. I will go slow. The widow is never the same again. Stay until the end. Because this story will remind you that sometimes the person who saves your life is the one brave enough to tell you the truth, even when the truth hurts. This is a story about survival, about redemption, about learning to trust again after betrayal breaks you, and about the kind of love that makes you want to live when you have spent years wanting to die. If you have ever felt alone against impossible odds, if you have ever wondered whether you deserve happiness after everything you have been through, if you have ever needed someone to remind you that your past does not define your future, this story is for you. Now settle in. Get comfortable. And let me take you back to the winter of 1878, when the cold came early to the Wind River Valley. The winter of 1878 came early to the Wind River Valley, bringing with it a cold so fierce it could freeze a man's breath before it left his lips. Clara Matthews woke to a sound that did not belong. Footsteps, crunching through snow outside her cabin. Her hand found the rifle beside her bed before her eyes fully opened. This was not the first time. She moved to the window without lighting a lamp. Outside, the world was silver and black, moonlight on snow, shadows between the pines. Nothing moved, but something had been there. She knew it. She had known for weeks now. 6 months. That was how long it had been since Thomas died. Thrown from his horse while trying to round up cattle that had strayed too far from the property. 6 months of struggling to keep the homestead running. Of chopping wood until her hands bled. Of lying awake at night listening to the coyotes howl and wondering if the wolves would come closer. She was 23 years old, and she felt ancient. Dawn broke gray and cold. Clara stood on her porch, the same porch where she had said goodbye to Thomas that last morning, and surveyed her crumbling kingdom. The Matthews homestead was supposed to be a dream. Now it was a slow nightmare. Fence posts leaned at drunken angles, wire gaps wide enough for cattle to walk through. The barn roof had visible holes patched with canvas that flapped in the wind. The woodpile was dangerously low for this time of year. Her own reflection in the frozen water trough showed a gaunt face, hollow eyes, hands rough as leather. She counted the cattle in the south pasture. 15 yesterday, 12 today, 3 missing. Fence cut clean, not broken by weather. Someone was bleeding her dry, theft by theft. Clara followed the tracks of the missing cattle. They led northeast toward the mountains, then simply stopped at a creek. Whoever took them knew what they were doing. On her way back, she found something worse. 3 dead coyotes strung up on her property line, throats cut, arranged in a row, not predators attacking livestock. A message. You are prey now. Back at the cabin, Clara found a letter that came with yesterday's supply delivery. She had been too exhausted to read it. Her brother-in-law Harold's handwriting. But the words did not sound like him. Dear Clara, I have found a buyer for the property, Mr. Samuel Dawson of Wind River. A respectable businessman offers a fair price. More than fair. You have 30 days to sign the enclosed papers, or I will be forced to pursue legal action. As Thomas's closest male relative, I have rights to the property in the absence of a will or heir. Come home, Clara. A woman alone has no business trying to run a homestead. Accept what you are before it is too late. There are people who very much want that land. Do not make this difficult. Harold. Clara read it twice. The first time with hurt, the second with cold fury. The phrase, "do not make this difficult," did not sound like Harold. It sounded like a threat being passed through him. She looked at the 3 dead coyotes visible through her window, at the cut fence, at the letter. Someone was orchestrating this, someone patient, someone who wanted her gone or dead. A memory surfaced unbidden. Thomas's voice, the morning he died. If anything happens to me, do not trust anyone who comes from Missouri. Promise me, Clara, and whatever you do not sell this land. She had asked why. He had kissed her forehead, avoiding the question like he avoided so many questions, and rode out to find the strayed cattle. That was the last time she saw him alive. Night was falling. Clara stood on the porch with her rifle, a Winchester .73, Thomas's prized possession. Her hands were cracked and bleeding. Her body ached. She could not remember the last full night of sleep. The smart thing would be to take Harold's offer. Go back to Missouri. Let someone else fight this battle. Clara chambered around. Thomas, she whispered to the cold wind. What did you bring down on us? No answer. Just the wind. Just the distant howl of wolves, closer than they should be. Just the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel at shadows. Waiting. She had survived 6 months alone. She would survive whatever came next. Or she would die on her feet, on her land, with a gun in her hands. Either way, she was not running. Clara had come west with Thomas Matthews 3 years ago, chasing dreams that turned to dust somewhere between Missouri and Wyoming. She was the daughter of a bankrupt merchant in St. Louis. Her father had committed suicide when his debts became too heavy to bear. Her mother died of consumption the following winter. She had married Thomas to escape a life of servitude as a housemaid for wealthy families. He promised her adventure. He promised her a new beginning. He promised her land of their own, where they could build something that belonged to nobody but them. Those promises had felt like salvation. Now they felt like chains. The cabin creaked around her as she moved through her evening routine, stoking the fire, checking the locks, counting her remaining ammunition. 23 rounds for the Winchester, 12 for the Colt revolver Thomas kept in the bedroom drawer. Enough to make a stand. Not enough to survive a siege. She ate a cold supper of beans and bread, too tired to cook anything proper. The food was tasteless in her mouth, but she forced it down anyway. A body needed fuel to fight. After supper, she retrieved the items she had found hidden under the floorboards 2 weeks after Thomas died. A map and a letter. The map was crude, hand-drawn, showing the area around her property. An X marked somewhere in the eastern hills. She did not know what it meant. The letter was worse. I will find you, ghost, wherever you run. The signature read SD Ghost. Thomas's nickname? A code name? She did not know. Thomas had taken his secrets to the grave and left her to dig them up alone. Clara set the papers aside and checked her rifle one more time. The metal was cold against her palms. 30 days, Harold had written. 30 days until they came for her whether she signed or not. She looked out the window at the darkness pressing against the glass, at the snow that glowed faintly under starlight, at the land she had learned to love despite everything. This was her home now, the only home she had left. She would not give it up without a fight. Clara Matthews did not sleep that night. She sat in the chair by the window with the Winchester across her lap and watched the shadows move across the snow. Waiting. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, beyond the mountains, her enemy was waiting too. The question was, who would blink first? As the first gray light of dawn crept over the eastern peaks, Clara made herself a promise. It would not be her. The cold seeped through every crack in the cabin walls. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and added another log to the fire. The flames crackled and hissed, casting dancing shadows across the rough wooden floor. She thought about the woman she had been before Thomas. A girl, really, barely 20 years old, with dreams bigger than sense and a heart ready to believe in anything. She had looked at Thomas Matthews and seen a hero, a man who would carry her away from everything she wanted to escape. She had been such a fool, but she was not that girl anymore. 6 months of surviving alone had burned away her softness. What remained was something harder, something that could endure. Clara checked her rifle one more time. The action was smooth, the barrel was clean. Thomas had taught her to care for weapons properly, at least. One useful thing among all his lies. 28 days, she thought. 28 days until Harold's deadline. 28 days to find out who wanted her dead and why. 28 days to decide whether she would fight or run. Clara already knew the answer. Running was not in her nature. It never had been. She had followed Thomas west when everyone told her it was madness. She had stayed on this land when easier choices beckoned. She would stay now. Whatever was coming, she would face it. The sun rose higher. Clara made coffee and drank it black and bitter. She had work to do, always work to do. The cattle needed checking, the fences needed mending, the wood needed chopping. And somewhere in all that work, she needed to find the truth about her husband, about Ghost, about the man who signed his letters SD. Clara Matthews picked up her rifle and stepped out into the cold morning air. The war had already begun. She just had not known it until now. 2 days later, gunshots shattered the morning silence. 3 shots, rapid fire, from somewhere north of Clara's property. Clara saddled Penny, her stubborn mare, the only horse that survived last winter, and rode toward the sound. She told herself it was practical. Gunfire near her land was her business. She did not acknowledge the part of her that was desperate for any break in the crushing loneliness. She found carnage in a frozen creek bed. 3 men lay dead in the snow, blood pooling black in the cold. Road agents she recognized. Jenks, Miller, and Cole. Trash who had been terrorizing the territory for months. Nobody touched them because they supposedly had protection from someone powerful in town. Standing over them was the largest man Clara had ever seen. He was built like a mountain given human form. At least 6.5 feet tall, shoulders wide enough to block a doorway, hands that could crush a man's skull. His coat was dark and travel-worn, his hat pulled low. He was bleeding from a wound in his left shoulder, but he was upright, calm, already reloading. His horse stood nearby, a black beast easily 17 hands high. Even the horse looked dangerous. Clara drew her rifle. "That is far enough," she called out. "Who are you, and why are these men dead?" The giant raised his hands slowly, showing empty palms. When he spoke, his voice was deep, not loud, but resonant, like distant thunder or stones grinding together. "They tried to take my horse, I disagreed. 3 against 1, and you are the one standing?" Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile. I disagreed emphatically. Clara did not lower the rifle. She studied him, the way he held himself despite the wound. Combat training, certainly. The quality of his gun. Expensive and well-maintained. The way his eyes catalogued everything about her, even as he pretended to be passive. This was not an ordinary drifter. "Those 3 work for someone," Clara said. "Someone who is going to ask questions. Let them ask." He met her eyes and she felt something jolt through her. Not fear exactly, awareness. His eyes were the color of honey and sunlight, warm and sharp at the same time. "I am looking for the Matthews place. Was told in town that Thomas Matthews might sell some of his stock." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. "Thomas Matthews is dead." A pause. Something shifted in those golden eyes. Surprise and something else she could not read. "I did not know." His voice softened. "I am sorry." "Are you?" Clara did not know why she was pushing, only that she needed to. "You do not seem like a man who deals in cattle. I do not seem like a lot of things." He lowered his hands slowly. "Name is Elijah Stone. I have a place about 15 miles north, Stone Creek. Bought it last spring. Do not get down this way much." Every instinct told Clara to send him away. He was dangerous. That was obvious. He knew something about Thomas. That was obvious too. And there was something about the way he looked when she mentioned her husband's name. Not surprised that Thomas was dead. Surprised that she was Thomas's wife. But his shoulder was bleeding badly now, soaking through his coat. And Clara recognized the 3 dead men. They had stolen cattle from every small rancher in the valley, including probably her. "You can come with me," she heard herself say. "I will stitch that shoulder before you bleed out. Then you will answer some questions." Elijah studied her for a long moment. "You are not afraid of me. I am terrified of you." Clara finally lowered the rifle. "Slightly. But I have spent 6 months being afraid of everything. I'm tired of it. Mount up." At the cabin, Clara stitched his wound at the kitchen table. Her hands were steady despite the thundering of her heart. Up close, she could see the map of violence written on his body, scars on his hands, the ridge of an old bullet wound on his shoulder, a knife scar visible at his collar. He watched her work with those unnerving golden eyes, did not flinch even when she dug deep for a bullet fragment. "You have done this before," he observed. "Thomas taught me. He was always getting hurt." She paused, needle suspended. He was not careful with himself. Most men are not. "Are you?" A ghost of a smile. "I am still breathing." When she finished, Clara sat across from him and asked the question that had been burning. "You knew my husband's name before I told you. How?" Elijah was silent for a long moment. She watched him decide how much to reveal, and noticed that he was deciding it all. A truthful man would not need to calculate. "I heard about him in town," he said finally, "about the accident, about his widow trying to hold the homestead alone. And you just happened to ride 15 miles to buy cattle from a dead man? I wanted to see the stock. You wanted to see something." Clara leaned forward. "What?" He met her eyes, and for a moment she saw something raw there. Pain and determination, and something that looked almost like recognition. "I wanted to see if the stories were true," he said quietly. "About the woman holding this place together alone. The one everyone in town says is too stubborn to know when she is beaten." Clara felt heat rise to her face. "And what did you decide?" "That the stories do not do you justice." The words hung between them. Clara should throw him out. She should demand real answers. She should not be noticing the way the firelight caught the silver in his hair, or the gentle way those massive hands handled the coffee cup, or the warmth that spread through her when he looked at her like she was something remarkable. She was a widow, 6 months a widow. This was inappropriate. "The cattle," she said, retreating to business. "You wanted to buy them, if you are willing to sell." He named a price that was nearly double what she expected. Clara stared at him. "That is generous. It is fair, good stock, and you have kept them healthy through hard circumstances." He shrugged those massive shoulders. "I would not offer less." They agreed on terms. Half now. Half when he collected the cattle in spring. It was enough money to get Clara through the winter, to fix the worst of the damage. It was also enough to let her stay, to resist Harold's pressure. Almost as if Elijah knew exactly what she needed. He left at sunset, promising to return to check on the cattle, and to bring supplies she would need. Clara watched him ride away until his massive form was swallowed by the gathering darkness. She should feel relieved, safer even. The 3 outlaws who had been plaguing the valley were dead, and she had money to survive the winter. Instead, she felt more unsettled than ever. Elijah Stone was hiding something. He looked at her like he knew her, or knew something about her. And when she mentioned Thomas's name, there was a flicker in his eyes that looked almost like recognition. Not recognition of the name, recognition of something connected to it. Clara retrieved the mysterious map and letter from beneath the floorboards. I will find you, ghost, wherever you run. S.D. Thomas died with secrets. Now a stranger with secrets of his own had appeared. In Clara's experience, coincidences were just patterns you had not figured out yet. She looked at the letter again, at the map with its cryptic X marked in the eastern hills. 28 days until Harold's deadline, 28 days to find the truth. Clara set the papers aside and picked up her rifle. Whatever Elijah Stone was hiding, she would find out, one way or another. 5 days later, Clara rode into Wind River for supplies and for answers. The town was small but bustling, a main street of wooden buildings, hitching posts lined with horses, the smell of wood smoke and manure. She noticed immediately that something had changed. People who used to greet her with pity now avoided her eyes. Conversations stopped when she approached. Even the dry goods clerk, who had known her since she arrived, was curt, rushing her through her purchases. Fear. The whole town smelled of fear. And it started, she realized, after those 3 outlaws died. Clara sought out the one person in town she trusted. Mary Jenkins ran the boarding house and had been a quiet ally since Thomas's death. Mama Jenkins was a tall, dignified black woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She pulled Clara into the kitchen and closed the door. You need to be careful, child. Her voice was low and urgent. There is a man been asking about you, a merchant named Samuel Dawson. Clara's blood chilled. The name from Harold's letter. He has been asking about your land, Mama Jenkins continued, about Thomas, about whether you found anything Thomas left behind. She gripped Clara's hand. He has also been asking about a stranger who killed 3 men near your property. Elijah Stone. That his name? Mama Jenkins' expression sharpened. Word of advice. That man is either going to save your life or get you killed. Maybe both. Clara encountered Samuel Dawson outside the general store and understood immediately why the town feared him. He was not physically imposing. Average height, well-dressed, silver hair, and a pleasant, forgettable face. He wore pristine white gloves despite the muddy streets. But his eyes were wrong. There was nothing behind them, no warmth, no anger, no emotion at all, like looking into the eyes of a snake, Mrs. Matthews. His voice was smooth, cultured, courteous. What a pleasure to finally meet you. I have heard so much about your courage holding that homestead alone, Mr. Dawson. Clara kept her hand near her coat pocket where her derringer rested. My brother-in-law mentioned you, dear Harold, so concerned about your welfare. Dawson smiled, and it was technically perfect, and utterly wrong. I wanted to extend my offer in person. Your land would be perfect for expanding my cattle operations. I am prepared to offer 3 times its assessed value. It is not for sale. Everything is for sale, Mrs. Matthews. Still smiling, still polite. It is simply a matter of finding the right price. He leaned closer, and Clara had to force herself not to step back. Your husband understood that, eventually. The threat was barely veiled. Clara's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. My husband is dead, Mr. Dawson. Whatever understanding he reached died with him. Something flickered in those empty eyes. Just for a moment. Frustration? Rage? Pity, Dawson said softly. Thomas was always smarter than he appeared. I hope you will prove equally intelligent. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Clara shaking in the cold street. She found the town doctor behind the saloon, drinking from a flask with trembling hands. Benjamin Whitman was 60 years old and looked 80, gaunt, red-eyed, wrapped in a stained coat. But when Clara approached, something sparked in his eyes. Fear. But also something else. Hope. Mrs. Matthews. His voice was a rough whisper. You should not be seen talking to me. You examined my husband's body. He flinched as if struck. Tell me the truth, Clara pressed. Was it an accident? Whitman looked around frantically, then pulled her into the shadow between buildings. The fall killed him. But he did not just fall. The words came fast and terrified. Defensive wounds on his hands, skull fracture from behind, wrong angle for a fall from a horse. Someone beat him, then made it look like an accident. Why did you not say anything? Because I am a coward. Tears streamed down his weathered face. Because Dawson owns the sheriff and the judge and half the town. Because my daughter was killed by outlaws 15 years ago, and I could not save her, and I have been too broken to save anyone since. He pressed a folded paper into her hands. Your husband came to me 3 days before he died. Asked me to write down what he said in case something happened to him. I was supposed to give it to you if... I could not. I was too afraid. Clara unfolded the paper. Thomas's words transcribed in the doctor's shaky hand. Clara does not know what I was. She can never know. It would destroy her. But if I die, she needs to understand. The gold is not worth her life. Let Silas have it. Leave. Run. Do not let my past kill my future. I should have told her everything. Now it is too late. God forgive me for what I was, and for what I am leaving her to face. Clara's hands trembled as she read the words again. Silas. The gold. What I was. Thomas had been hiding something far worse than she imagined. She returned to her cabin to find Harold Matthews waiting on her porch. Her brother-in-law was 40 years old, once handsome, now haggard, dark circles under his eyes, a nervous tick in his jaw. He looked like a man who had not slept in weeks. Clara, his voice was strained. You need to sign the papers. No. Please. And here was what stopped Clara cold. Harold was crying. This hard, pragmatic man who disapproved of her from the start was weeping openly. You do not understand. It is not about the land. It is... What is it about, Harold? He looked around wildly as if expecting someone to emerge from the trees. I owe money. A lot of money. To the wrong people. His voice dropped to a whisper. They will kill my wife, Clara. My children. If I do not deliver this land, they will... Who, Harold? Who are you afraid of? But Harold just shook his head, backing toward his horse. 23 days. You have 23 days, and then they are coming whether you sign or not. Please, Clara, I am begging you. Run! He rode away into the darkness. And Clara was left with more questions than answers, and the first terrible suspicion that her enemy was far more dangerous than she imagined. She was sitting at her table staring at Thomas's confession when she heard hoofbeats outside. She grabbed her rifle and opened the door. Elijah Stone was dismounting his black horse, supplies loaded on a pack horse behind him. He took one look at her face and his expression hardened. What happened? Who are you, Elijah Stone? Clara's voice was cold and controlled. And do not lie to me. I have had enough lies to last a lifetime. Elijah was silent for a long moment. Then he walked past her into the cabin, sat at the table, picked up Thomas's confession. He read it. His jaw tightened. I will tell you who I am, he said quietly, and then you can decide whether to point that rifle at me or beside me. He looked up, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not just pain, recognition, understanding. I am the man who is going to help you kill the people who murdered your husband, because the same people murdered my wife. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, the rifle heavy in her hands. Your wife, she said. Margaret. Elijah's voice was rough. She was killed 5 years ago. By the Dalton gang. Dalton. Clara remembered the letter. S.D. Silas Dalton? Elijah nodded. The man calling himself Samuel Dawson. He is Silas Dalton, leader of the most vicious gang of outlaws this territory has ever seen. And Thomas, your husband, was one of them. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She staggered, caught herself on the doorframe. No. His name was not Thomas Matthews then. It was Thomas Malloy. They called him the Ghost because he was the planner. Always thinking 3 steps ahead, always leaving no trace. You are lying. I am telling you what I spent 3 years learning. Elijah's voice was gentle but relentless. Thomas was Dalton's right hand until 5 years ago. Then something happened. There was a big job, a mining company payroll, $50,000 in gold. After that job, Thomas disappeared, just vanished. Clara's mind raced. Thomas's paranoia, his refusal to talk about his past, the way he tensed whenever strangers rode onto the property. It all made a terrible kind of sense. But here is the part that matters, Elijah continued. Thomas did not just run. He turned informant. He gave federal prosecutors the locations of 3 Dalton hideouts, testified in secret, got immunity in exchange for helping break up the gang. The map, Clara whispered, under the floorboards. Thomas took the gold as insurance. If Silas ever found him, he could bargain for his life. But Silas does not want the gold back. He wants Thomas to suffer. And since Thomas is dead, he wants me to suffer instead. He wants you dead, Clara. And he wants you to spend your last days afraid. Clara walked to the fireplace on legs that felt like water. She stared into the flames, trying to reconcile the man she had married with the criminal Elijah described. "Why should I trust you?" she asked without turning around. "You have admitted you came here to use me. You should not." Elijah picked up her rifle and held it out to her. "You should point this at me and tell me to leave. Every logical part of your brain is probably screaming at you to do exactly that." Clara took the rifle. Her hands were steady now. "And if I do not, if I let you stay, then I will teach you everything I know about hunting and killing. I will help you find that gold before Silas does. And when he comes, and he will come, I will stand beside you until one of us stops breathing." "Why?" Elijah was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Because I am tired of hunting alone. Because for the first time in 5 years, I have found someone who makes me want to live through the final battle instead of dying in it. And because you deserve better than what Thomas gave you, Clara Matthews. You deserve the truth. And you deserve a fighting chance." Clara walked back to the table and sat across from him. "Then tell me everything," she said. "And we will figure out what comes next, together." By firelight, Elijah told his story. "My name is Elijah Stone. I was a U.S. Marshal for 12 years stationed out of Kansas. They called me the Mountain because of my size, and because I never stopped hunting once I started." He poured whiskey. Clara's whiskey from the bottle Thomas kept for special occasions, and drank deep. "5 years ago, I was tracking the Dalton gang, led by a man named Silas Dalton, smart, patient, vicious. They had robbed banks, stagecoaches, a mining payroll, killed at least 12 men, maybe more." Clara sat across from him, rifle still in her hands, not pointed at him, not pointed away either. "I was getting close, too close. So Silas decided to send me a message." "What kind of message?" Elijah's hands trembled. He set down the whiskey. "My wife, Margaret. She was bringing me lunch at the blacksmith shop where I worked before I became a marshal. That is what I told people, what I told myself. But the truth is, Silas Dalton's men took her, grabbed her off the street, kept her for 3 days, then left her body where I would find it." Clara felt the anger drain out of her, replaced by something else. Understanding. "3 days," Elijah continued, his voice hollow. "I have spent 5 years imagining what happened in those 3 days, and I have spent 5 years killing the men responsible. 7 of them. I hunted them like animals, and I killed them without mercy. and I enjoyed it. He looked at her with haunted eyes. So when I tell you that your husband's past does not make you complicit, I am not just being kind. I am telling you because I have done worse. I have become the very thing I hunted. And if there is any redemption for me, it starts with helping you survive what is coming. Clara stood abruptly. The rifle clattered to the floor. She made it 3 steps toward the door before her legs gave out. Elijah caught her, those massive arms surprisingly gentle, but she shoved him away. "Do not touch me." Her voice was raw, cracking. "You came here looking for Thomas, for information about the gold. You have been lying to me since the moment we met." Yes. The simple admission was somehow worse than a defense. "I came here hunting Silas Dalton," Elijah said. "I knew Thomas was hiding in this area. I thought if I found Thomas, I would find Silas. But Thomas was already dead, and you were—" "I was what? Convenient? A good source of information? You were the bravest thing I had ever seen." His voice dropped low. "A woman alone holding off wolves and winter, and men who want her dead. When I saw you on that porch with your rifle, I thought there is someone who understands what it means to fight when there is no hope left. Do not." Clara's voice broke. "Do not. You dare try to make this into something beautiful. My husband was a criminal, a liar. Everything we built was founded on blood money and betrayal." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were devastated. "I loved him, Elijah. I loved him, and he was a lie." The fire popped and crackled. Wind howled outside the cabin walls. Clara sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands. She did not cry. She had no tears left for Thomas Matthews, for Thomas Malloy, for whoever he had really been. "Tell me about the gold," she said finally, her voice flat and exhausted. $50,000. Taken from a mining company payroll, the biggest job the Dalton gang ever pulled. Thomas planned it, made it look like an inside job. The company blamed their own security, and nobody looked at Dalton's gang, and Thomas kept it. He hid it before he testified. "Insurance," he said. "But I think it was something else. I think he was trying to protect you. If Silas ever found him, he could offer the gold in exchange for your life." Clara laughed bitterly. "And instead, Silas found him and killed him. And now he wants the gold and my life. The gold is somewhere on your property. The map Thomas left. That X marks the location. Then why has Silas not already dug it up? Because he does not have the map. Thomas hid it too well. Silas has been searching for months, buying up land, bribing officials, killing anyone who might know something. But he has not found it." Clara went to the floorboards and retrieved the map, studied it with new eyes. "The Eastern Hills," she said. "There is an old mine there, abandoned years ago. That would be the logical place. Easy to hide something, easy to defend if you needed to." Clara set down the map and looked at Elijah. "So what do? We find the gold first, not to keep it, to use it. If we have what Silas wants, we have leverage, and if that does not work, then we kill him." Elijah's voice was cold. "Or he kills us. Either way, it ends." Clara picked up her rifle, checked the action, set it against the wall. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me to fight. Teach me to kill if I have to. And when this is over, we will see what is left of us, both of us." She extended her hand. Elijah took it. His palm engulfed hers completely, but his grip was gentle. "Welcome to the war, Clara Matthews. I have been at war for 6 months. I just did not know who the enemy was." Later that night, Clara lay awake in her bed, listening to Elijah settle onto the floor by the fire. He had offered to leave. She told him to stay. She was not sure why. She thought about Thomas. Not the lie, but the man she knew, the man who made her laugh, who held her when she cried, who worked himself ragged trying to build something real despite his fake past. Did he love her? She thought he did. She thought the guilt was killing him long before Silas's men caught up. Clara pulled Thomas's wedding ring from her finger, studied it in the moonlight, then set it on the bedside table, not throwing it away, not yet, but not wearing it either. Outside, the wind howled and the wolves called to each other in the darkness. Inside, Clara Matthews began to plan. 23 days until Harold's deadline. 23 days to learn how to fight. 23 days to decide whether she would live or die. She chose to live, whatever it cost. Dawn. Clara stood in the frozen meadow behind her cabin, arms aching, hands raw. Again, Elijah said. She drew the Colt he had given her, Thomas's old pistol cleaned and oiled, fired at the row of bottles 50 feet away. Missed 3, hit 2. You are anticipating the recoil. Let the gun surprise you. Easy for you to say. Your hands are the size of dinner plates, which makes it harder, not easier. He moved behind her, adjusting her stance, his hands on her shoulders, her waist, professional and impersonal, except her skin burned where he touched. The gun kicks differently in larger hands. More torque. Clara fired again. 4 out of 5. Better. They trained every day, shooting first, then hand-to-hand combat in the barn. You're small, Elijah explained. Use it. A man my size expects to overpower you. He does not expect you to drop low and take out his knee. He demonstrated in slow motion, letting her feel the movements. She was acutely aware of his body, the heat of him, the controlled power, the way he moved like a predator despite his size. Now, you try. Attack me. Clara lunged. Elijah caught her easily, but instead of pinning her, he guided her through the counter move, showing her how to break his grip, where to strike, how to use momentum. They ended up on the hay-covered floor, Clara on top of him, her knife at his throat, both breathing hard, neither moving. Good, Elijah said quietly, his eyes very dark. You learn fast. I have good motivation. She should get up. She did not. His hands rested on her hips, not pulling her closer, not pushing her away. Just there, warm through her thin dress. Clara, do not. She was not sure what she was refusing. Do not say we should not. I was going to say your form is improving. She laughed, actually laughed for the first time in months, and rolled off him. The moment broke, but something had shifted between them. 3 days into training, a rider appeared, young, skinny, barely old enough to shave. He introduced himself as William Thornton, looking for ranch work. Clara was ready to turn him away, but Elijah stopped her with a look. Later, when they were alone, he explained, he is one of Dalton's men. Clara's hand went to her gun. And you let him stay? He is a scout. Silas sent him to watch you. If we turn him away, Silas sends someone else, someone we will not recognize. Elijah's expression was grim. This way we know where the spy is, and we control what he sees. You want to feed him false information. I want to keep him close enough to turn. He is young, Clara, younger than you. You do not survive in Dalton's gang by choice. You survive by not having any other options. If we can show him another way. Clara studied the young man through the window. He was helping unload hay, moving with nervous energy, eyes constantly scanning for threats. He is terrified, she realized. Of Silas, of us, of everything. Elijah's voice softened. I have killed a lot of men. I would rather save one if I can. It happened on the 8th night. Clara woke to screaming, the horses trapped in the burning barn. She was running before she was fully conscious. Elijah beside her, Billy stumbling from the bunkhouse. The fire was spreading fast, too fast, deliberate. Arson, the horses. Clara tried to run into the flames. Elijah held her back. Let me go! You will die! Penny is in there! Her voice broke. She is all I have left of... Elijah released her and charged into the inferno. Seconds stretched into years. Clara could hear Penny screaming, could see the walls starting to collapse. Billy was throwing water on the flames, useless against the blaze. Then Elijah emerged, leading both horses, his coat on fire. Clara tackled him, rolling him in the snow to extinguish the flames. He was burned. Arms, shoulders, the left side of his face. But he was laughing. "Got them," he gasped. "Told you I could be careful." Later, Clara tended Elijah's burns in the cabin. His shirt was off, revealing a map of scars across his massive torso. She had seen some of them before. Now she saw all of them. "This one?" She traced a raised line across his ribs. "Knife fight in Abilene. Man thought I cheated at cards." "Did you?" "Badly. I am a terrible cheat." He winced as she applied salve. This one was Margaret's favorite. She used to say it looked like a river. Clara's hands stilled. "Tell me about her." She was tall, almost 6 feet, built like a draft horse and twice as stubborn. Could drink any man in town under the table. His voice was soft, remembering. "We met when she broke a chair over my head for getting too rowdy at her father's saloon." Sounds like love at first sight. Second sight. First sight, I was unconscious. Clara laughed, and Elijah smiled, really smiled, transforming his weathered face. "I do not compare you to her," he said suddenly. "I need you to know that. You are nothing alike." She was thunder and lightning. "You are—" "What?" "The calm after the storm. The thing that makes you believe you survived for a reason." Clara did not know what to say. So she leaned down and kissed him. It was brief, barely a brush of lips. But it ignited something. Elijah's hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite their size. And for a moment she felt safe, completely, impossibly safe. Then she pulled back. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am not ready. I thought I was, but do not apologize." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I have waited 5 years to feel anything but rage. I can wait longer." That night they slept in the cabin together for the first time. Clara in her bed, Elijah on the floor nearby. But when Clara woke from a nightmare, Thomas's face dissolving into Silas's empty eyes, Elijah was there, holding her hand. "I am here," he murmured. "I am not going anywhere." She did not let go of his hand until morning. Outside, Billy sat by the ruins of the burned barn, keeping watch. Twice he took out a blood-stained pocket watch and stared at it. Twice he put it away without looking at the time. 16 days remained until Harold's deadline. 16 days until Silas made his move. Clara was almost ready. Almost. 4 days later, Clara stood at Thomas's grave, a simple wooden cross on the hill overlooking the homestead. Snow was beginning to fall. She had not visited since the funeral, had not been able to face it. "I do not know who you were," she said to the frozen ground. "I do not know if anything between us was real, but I thought you should know. I am going to survive this, whatever you left me to face. I am going to survive." She paused. The wind howled, "And I am falling in love with another man. A man who kills people. A man who has been more honest with me in 3 weeks than you were in 3 years. Her voice cracked. "Does that make me terrible? Does that make us even?" No answer. Just the wind, just the cold. "I thought you should know," she repeated. Then she walked away. She found Elijah in the woods, but what she saw stopped her cold. He had caught one of Silas's scouts, a man who had been watching the cabin for days, and Elijah was beating him half to death, fists like hammers, face twisted with rage. "Where is he?" Elijah roared. "Where is Silas?" The man could not answer, could barely breathe. "Elijah!" Clara's scream cut through the red haze. Elijah froze, fist raised, knuckles bloody. He looked at his hands, at the broken man beneath him, at Clara, and she saw it. The monster he warned her about, the thing he became hunting the Dalton gang, the reason he was afraid to love her. "This is what I am," he said, his voice hollow. "This is what you are falling for, Clara, a killer, a man who enjoys hurting people. I told myself I only hurt people who deserve it, but—" He looked at his hands again. "I liked it. I liked making him scream." Clara walked toward him slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. "Elijah, do not." He backed away. "Do not tell me it is okay. It is not okay. I am not okay. I have not been okay since Margaret died, and I do not know if I ever will be. I was not going to say it is okay." She stopped in front of him. "I was going to say, I understand. You cannot. I killed a man last month." "Did I tell you that?" Her voice was steady. "He came onto my property at night, tried to take more than cattle. I shot him in the chest and watched him die, and I did not feel anything. Not guilt, not horror, nothing." She took Elijah's bloody hands in hers. "We do not get to be innocent anymore, Elijah. We just get to choose what kind of monsters we become." They brought the scout back to the cabin, alive barely. Billy guarded him while Clara and Elijah talked. "I cannot promise I will not become that again," Elijah said. "That rage, it is always there, right beneath the surface. I am not asking you to be perfect. I am asking you to try." Clara poured whiskey for both of them. "I spent 3 years with a man who pretended to be something he was not. I would rather have an honest monster than a beautiful lie. Is that what I am? An honest monster? You are a man who has done monstrous things for understandable reasons. So am I now." She drank. "Maybe that makes us perfect for each other. Or maybe it makes us doomed. I am tired of trying to figure out which." Elijah reached across the table and took her hand. "When this is over, if we survive, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you see when you look at me. And if you fail, then I will get up and try again. That is all any of us can do." The scout, once conscious and properly terrified, revealed crucial information. Silas knew about Elijah, knew who he was and why he was here. Silas had bought the sheriff and most of the town's influential citizens. The attack was planned for 10 days from now, when Harold's legal deadline expired. But most importantly, Silas was not sure the gold existed anymore. Thomas might have spent it, hidden it somewhere inaccessible, or lied about having it. This was their leverage. That night, Harold appeared at the cabin, alone, unarmed, shaking. "Clara, please. You have to listen to me. Give me one reason not to shoot you." "Because I know where Silas is vulnerable, and because—" Harold's voice broke. "Because I am going to die either way. At least let me die for something good." He told them everything. Silas's fake identity, his control of the town, his obsession with the gold. And one crucial detail. Silas has a ledger, keeps records of every bribe, every crime, every person he has bought. It is his insurance. If anyone betrays him, he can destroy them. But if someone got that ledger, it would destroy him instead, Elijah finished. Harold nodded. "He keeps it in his private office, above the general store. I can get you inside." Clara and Elijah exchanged looks. "Why?" Clara asked. "Why turn on him now?" "Because I saw what he did to the last person who failed him." Harold's eyes were haunted. "And because Thomas was my brother. Whatever he did, whoever he was before, he was still my brother. And Silas killed him." Clara walked Harold to his horse. "I remember when Thomas brought me home to meet your family," she said. "Everyone looked at me like I was a disease. Except you. You were not what we expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to dismiss." Harold mounted his horse. "Thomas loved you, Clara. Whatever else he lied about, that was real. He told me once that you were the only good thing he ever done." He rode away into the darkness. Clara returned to the cabin to find Elijah waiting. Do you trust him? Elijah asked. No, but I believe he wants to make things right. She sat beside him. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. It is the only thing that separates us from people like Silas. They sat together in silence, watching the fire burn low. Then Clara stood, took Elijah's hand, and led him toward the bedroom. Clara, I am still not ready for everything, but I do not want to sleep alone tonight. Is that enough? It is more than enough. They lay together in the narrow bed, fully clothed, his massive body curled around hers, and for the first time in months, maybe years, Clara slept without nightmares. 12 days remained. The plan was forming, but the enemy was closer than they knew. The plan was simple. Harold would get Clara and Elijah into the general store at night. They would steal Silas's ledger and use it as leverage, threatening to expose him unless he left Wind River forever. It was a plan built on hope and desperation. It failed immediately. They arrived at the general store after midnight. Harold let them in through the back door, led them upstairs to Silas's office. The office was empty. No ledger, no documents, nothing but a single sheet of paper on the desk. Clara picked it up. Her blood ran cold. Did you really think I would not know, Mrs. Matthews? Your brother-in-law is many things, but subtle is not one of them. Thank you for delivering yourself and the marshal to me. It saves considerable effort. See you soon. S.D. The doors burst open. Sheriff Wade led a dozen armed men into the room. His face was apologetic, but his gun was steady. I'm sorry about this, Mrs. Matthews. I truly am. But Mr. Dawson has been good to this town. Dawson is Silas Dalton, Elijah growled. He is wanted for murder robbery. I know who he is. Wade's voice hardened. I have known for years, and I have made my peace with it. Harold was dragged in, beaten bloody, hands bound. I did not tell them, he gasped. Clara, I swear I did not. He did not have to. Silas Dalton entered behind his men, still wearing his Samuel Dawson suit, still wearing those pristine white gloves. I have suspected Harold's loyalty for weeks. This was merely confirmation. He approached Harold with that empty smile. You chose poorly, Harold. Your family in Missouri is already dead. Harold's scream was animal, broken. He lunged at Silas, but the guards caught him. Kill him, Silas said casually. Make it slow. No! Clara fought against the men holding her. You bastard, he was trying to help. He was trying to betray me. The two things I cannot abide are disloyalty and loose ends. Silas turned those empty eyes on her. Your husband was both, and now, Mrs. Matthews, so are you. Billy was among Silas's men. Gun drawn, face pale, avoiding Clara's eyes. William. Silas noticed Clara's gaze. She thought you were her friend, did she not? Thought she could turn you against me? Billy did not answer. Show her. Silas's voice sharpened. Show her where your loyalty lies. Slowly, Billy raised his gun, pointed it at Clara. Their eyes met. Clara saw the terror there, the conflict, and something else. Something that looked almost like an apology. I am sorry, Billy whispered. He turned and fired, not at Clara, at the guard holding Elijah. Chaos erupted. Billy's shot triggered a firefight. In the confusion, Elijah broke free, his massive fists dropping guards like they were nothing. Run! Billy screamed, firing wildly to create cover. Clara grabbed Elijah's hand and they bolted for the window. Glass shattered as they plunged through, rolling onto the roof of the adjacent building. Behind them, she heard Billy cry out, hit, falling. But there was no time to look back. They ran through the sleeping town, gunshots echoing behind them. Elijah was limping badly. One of the guards had shot him in the leg, but he did not slow. They stole horses from the livery and rode hard for the mountains. They stopped at dawn, hidden in a cave system Elijah knew from his tracking days. "We have to go back," Clara said immediately. "Billy, Harold, Harold is dead." Elijah's voice was flat. "I saw them kill him. And Billy," he shook his head, "even if he survived, Silas will make an example of him." Clara sank to the ground, overwhelmed. In one night she had lost everything. Her home was in enemy hands. Her allies were dead or captured. The man hunting her knew exactly who she was and where she would run. "It is over," she whispered. We lost. We have not lost yet." Elijah crouched in front of her, taking her face in his bloody hands. "We still have each other. We still have the map. And Silas still does not know where the gold is. What does the gold matter now? It matters because he wants it, because he is obsessed with it, because it is the one thing that might draw him out of that town and into a fight we can win." Clara looked at him. This battered giant, bleeding from a dozen wounds, still fighting. "The map shows a location in the eastern hills," she said slowly. "An abandoned mine. Then that is where we go. That is where we make our stand. Just the two of us against Silas and his army? Not just the two of us." Elijah's jaw set. "There are others who have been hurt by Silas, others who want justice but were too afraid to act alone. We find them. We give them hope. And then we burn his whole empire to the ground." That night, huddled together for warmth in the frozen cave, Clara finally broke. She cried for Harold, who died trying to make things right, for Billy, who chose them over his own survival, for Thomas, who she would never be able to hate completely no matter how much he deserved it, for herself, the naive girl who came west looking for adventure and found only blood. Elijah held her through all of it, saying nothing, just being there. When the tears finally stopped, Clara pulled back and looked at him. "I love you." The words surprised them both. "Clara, you do not have to. I know I do not have to. I want to. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever happens at that mine, I need you to know. You are not just an alliance of convenience. You are not just a weapon against Silas. You are—" She touched his face. "You are the reason I want to survive this." Elijah was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I have been dead inside for 5 years, going through the motions, hunting Silas because I did not know how to do anything else. And then I found you, and you made me want to live again." He kissed her, deeply, desperately, like a drowning man finding air. "I love you too," he breathed against her lips. "God help us both. I love you too." 6 days remained until Silas's planned attack, but the timeline was accelerating. The final battle was coming. Ready or not? Clara and Elijah rode to Mama Jenkins' boarding house under cover of darkness. Mama Jenkins met them at the back door, shotgun in hand. "Whole town is looking for you too, Dawson, Silas, whatever his name is. He has put a bounty on your heads, $500 each." "Will you turn us in?" Clara asked. Mama Jenkins snorted. "Child, I did not escape slavery by selling out my own people." "Get inside." Over coffee and cornbread, they explained the situation. The gold, the mine, the plan to make a stand. "You are crazy," Mama Jenkins said. "Both of you. Silas has at least 20 men." "We have something better than numbers," Elijah said. "We have a location he has to come to, and we have time to prepare." Mama Jenkins was quiet for a long moment. Then she went to a locked chest and retrieved a worn army coat. "My husband, James. He was killed by Dalton's gang 10 years ago, shot in the back while protecting a stagecoach." She checked the cylinder. "I have been waiting a long time for a chance to balance that particular book." Doc Whitman found them the next morning, sober for the first time in years, eyes clear and terrified. "They killed the sheriff," he reported. Silas decided Wade was a liability, shot him in his own office and blamed it on outlaws. He laughed bitterly. I suppose that is technically true. Why are you here, Doc? Clara asked. Because I spent 15 years being a coward. My daughter died because I was too drunk to save her. Your husband died because I was too afraid to tell the truth. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is a full confession. Everything I know about Silas Dalton's crimes going back 15 years. Names, dates, victims. That is not enough to convict him. No. But it is enough to make sure the world knows what he was after he is dead. Whitman's hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. I cannot shoot worth a damn, but I can tend wounds. Let me come with you. Let me do one useful thing before I die. They found Billy in an abandoned shepherd's cabin 5 miles from town, barely alive, shot twice, but breathing. He escaped, Mama Jenkins explained. Killed 2 guards and crawled through the snow for 3 days. One of my people found him this morning. Clara knelt beside the young man. His eyes fluttered open. Mrs. Matthews, I am sorry. I should have. You saved our lives. You chose us when you had every reason to choose them. Silas killed my father. Billy's voice was barely a whisper. Told me it was lawmen. Told me he was protecting me. But I found out the truth last year. He coughed blood. I have been waiting for a chance to make it right. Elijah leaned in. Can you ride? Cannot walk. But I can shoot. Billy's eyes hardened with something that looked almost like hope. Give me a gun and prop me against something solid. I will take as many of them with me as I can. They camped near the abandoned mine, making preparations. Elijah set traps, tripwires, deadfalls. Anything to slow Silas's advance. Clara memorized the terrain, planned escape routes, hiding spots. But as darkness fell, the preparations stopped. Tomorrow would come regardless. Tonight was all they had. Clara found Elijah sitting on a ridge overlooking the valley, staring at the stars. Penny, for your thoughts? Thinking about Margaret. He did not look at her, wondering if she would approve of what I am about to do. What are you about to do? Live. He finally turned to her. For the first time since she died, I want to live more than I want revenge. I want to build something with you. A life. A future. I want to see you grow old and gray. I want to die in bed at 90 with your hand in mine. His voice cracked. I am terrified that wanting those things will make me weak when I need to be strong. Clara sat beside him, leaning into his warmth. It will not make you weak. It will make you fight smarter. Rage makes you reckless. Love makes you careful. Where did you learn that? Just now. I made it up. She smiled. But it sounds true, does it not? Elijah laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and pulled her close. They sat together watching the stars, 2 broken people holding each other against the darkness. Whatever happens tomorrow, Clara said, I want you to know, these last weeks with you have been the best of my life. Not despite the danger, because of who you have helped me become. And who is that? Someone who fights, someone who loves, someone who refuses to give up. She kissed him then, and this time she did not pull back. This time she let herself fall completely, trusting him to catch her. Later, much later. They lay tangled together under blankets and starlight, and Elijah traced patterns on her skin. Relax, he murmured, as he had at every new touch, every careful exploration. I will go slow. And he did, gentle despite his size, patient despite his need, worshipping her with hands that had killed, with lips that had spoken only rage for years. Afterward, Clara lay against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Whatever happens tomorrow, she echoed. We face it together. Together, he agreed. Always. Clara woke to the sound of hoofbeats in the distance. Many hoofbeats. Elijah was already up, rifle in hand. They are coming. Clara found her own rifle, checked the ammunition, took a breath. Then let us give them something to remember. The abandoned mine was a natural fortress. Narrow approach, multiple defensive positions, rocky terrain that favored the defenders. Clara positioned their small force strategically. Mama Jenkins in the mine entrance with her shotgun, Moses covering the main approach. Doc Whitman in a side tunnel ready to provide medical support. Billy propped against a rock wall with 2 rifles within reach, eyes fever bright but steady. Elijah at the highest point, his long-range accuracy their first line of defense. Clara mobile, moving between positions, coordinating their defense. Silas's force appeared at dawn. At least 20 men, well armed, spreading out to surround the position, and at their center, pristine in his white gloves despite the journey, Silas Dalton himself. He rode forward under a white flag. Clara met him halfway. Rifle ready. Mrs. Matthews. His voice was pleasant, conversational. You have caused me considerable trouble. Good. I am offering you a final chance. Give me the gold's location and I will let you walk away, you and your giant. I have no personal quarrel with either of you. You are merely obstacles between me and what is rightfully mine. The gold was stolen from innocent people. It was never rightfully yours. Ownership is determined by possession, Mrs. Matthews. Philosophy is for people who have never had to take what they need. Silas's smile did not reach his eyes. Last chance. The gold or your lives. Clara looked at this man. This monster who killed Thomas, who killed Harold, who had destroyed countless lives without a moment's remorse. The gold is in the mine, she said. Come and get it. The battle was brutal. Silas's men attacked in waves. The first wave hit Elijah's position. His rifle spoke once, twice, 3 times. 3 men fell before they were halfway up the slope. The others scattered for cover. The second wave tried to flank through the western gully. Mama Jenkins met them with Moses, the thunderous blasts echoing off the rock walls. 2 more down. The survivors retreated. Billy caught a group trying to sneak through a side passage. Even half dead, his aim was true. His father's pocket watch sat open beside him, face up, catching the light. But Silas had numbers, and time, and patience. Doc Whitman took a bullet to the chest while trying to reach Billy with fresh ammunition. He died in Clara's arms, pressing his daughter's photograph into her hands. Remember her, he gasped. Remember all of them. Clara closed his eyes and picked up his rifle. Later, Mama Jenkins went down. A lucky shot through the mine entrance took her in the shoulder. She kept fighting one-handed, but she was fading. Get out of here, Clara ordered. Take the back tunnel. Child, I did not survive 60 years to die running. Mama Jenkins reloaded Moses with trembling fingers. But you should go. Find Elijah. End this. I will not leave you. You will, because that is what soldiers do. Complete the mission. Mama Jenkins met her eyes. Kill him, Clara. Kill him for James. Kill him for your husband. Kill him for every person that monster has ever hurt. Silas realized the frontal assaults were failing. He sent a group through the mine itself, through passages Clara did not know existed. Billy saw them first. Behind us! He threw himself at the attackers, knife in hand, screaming his father's name. Clara saw him fall, saw the muzzle flash, the red bloom on his chest, but his sacrifice bought them precious seconds. 3 attackers down, Billy on the ground, blood pooling. Clara reached him as the light faded from his eyes. Did I make it right? You made it right? Clara was crying now, tears freezing on her cheeks. You were brave, Billy, you were good. A ghost of a smile. The pocket watch fell from his fingers, still stained with old blood. Then he was gone. The battle had reduced both sides to fragments. Most of Silas's men were dead or fled. Mama Jenkins was unconscious from blood loss. Doc Whitman and Billy were dead, and Elijah was down. Clara found him at his position, leg wound reopened, barely conscious. Go, he rasped. Finish it. I am not leaving you. Silas is alone now. His men are broken. But he will not stop. He will never stop. Unless someone ends him. Elijah gripped her hand with fading strength. You can do this, Clara. You are stronger than you know. I am not. You are. His eyes found hers. You are the bravest person I have ever known. Now go be brave one more time. Clara found Silas in the mine's central chamber, standing before the wooden crates that held 50,000 in stolen gold. His suit was ruined now, his white gloves stained with dirt and blood, but his eyes were the same, empty, cold, devoid of human feeling. Mrs. Matthews, come to negotiate? Come to end this? They circled each other, weapons raised. Clara's hands were steady. Her heart was calm. Redemption is a fairy tale, Mrs. Matthews, Silas said. There is no redemption. There is only power. Who has it and who does not? Then let us find out who has it. Silas was fast. Faster than a man his age should be. His first shot clipped Clara's arm, spinning her sideways. She dived behind a crate, returned fire. Miss! Silas advanced, his gun clicking empty. He discarded it. Drew a knife, a wicked curved blade that gleamed in the dim light. I have killed 17 people with this knife, he said calmly. You will be 18. Clara was out of ammunition. Her arm was bleeding. She was exhausted, terrified, alone. But she was not done. She met Silas's charge with Thomas's knife, the one she found hidden with the map, and they grappled in the darkness. He was stronger, more experienced. His blade drew a line of fire across her ribs. But Clara was fighting for more than survival. She was fighting for Thomas, who tried to change, for Harold, who found courage at the end, for Billy, who chose good over survival, for Doc Whitman, who finally sobered up for justice, for Mama Jenkins, who never stopped fighting, for Elijah, who taught her that love is worth living for. She found an opening, a split second where Silas overreached and drove her knife into his chest. Silas looked down at the blade, looked up at her. His expression did not change. Impressive, he said. Then his legs folded, and he crumpled to the cave floor. Clara stood over him, breathing hard, watching the life fade from those empty eyes. My husband said redemption was possible, she said quietly. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about that. Silas did not respond. Silas would never respond to anything again. Clara limped out of the mine to find Elijah struggling toward her, using his rifle as a crutch. It is done. She collapsed into his arms, and they held each other amid the carnage. Two survivors in a field of death, alive against all odds. I love you, she said again. I know. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I know. I love you too, and I am never letting you go. Spring came to Wind River Valley. Clara stood before a row of graves on the hill behind her cabin, the same hill where Thomas lay. But the view had changed. 4 new markers stood beside her husband's cross. Benjamin Whitman. He found his courage. William Thornton. He chose the light. Harold Matthews. Brother redeemed. James Jenkins. Remembered at last. Clara placed wildflowers on each grave. The first wildflowers of spring, purple and yellow, pushing through the last of the snow. Thank you, she said simply, all of you. I will remember. The cabin had been rebuilt, expanded. The barn was new. Elijah built it himself despite the limp that would never fully heal. The cattle grazed in pastures with sturdy fences. Clara walked through her domain and hardly recognized it. 3 months ago, this was a crumbling homestead held together by desperation. Now it was a working ranch, profitable, growing. More importantly, it was a home. Mama Jenkins sat on the porch, her arm still in a sling, but her spirit unbroken. She had become a permanent fixture, first for recovery, now because she had nowhere else she would rather be. "You are wool gathering again," Mama Jenkins called out. "Man like yours works all day, least you could do is have dinner ready." "Yes, ma'am." Clara smiled and headed inside. She found Elijah in the south pasture, mending fence. He moved differently now, slower, more careful. The damage from the battle written in the way he favored his left leg. But his eyes were different too. The rage that used to simmer beneath the surface had faded, replaced by something warmer, something like peace. "Dinner is almost ready. Be there in a minute." He drove in a last nail, then set down the hammer and looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he had done every day since the battle, like he still could not believe she was real. "Stop that." "Stop what?" "Looking at me like I might disappear, cannot help it." He crossed to her, cupped her face in those enormous hands. "Every morning I wake up and I'm surprised you are still here, surprised any of this is real." "It is real." She kissed his palm. "We are real, and I am not going anywhere." That evening after dinner, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Mama Jenkins had retired early, claiming tiredness, though Clara suspected she was just giving them privacy. "I need to ask you something," Elijah said. "Anything." He reached into his pocket and produced a ring. Simple, gold, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's, and after her Margaret's. I thought I would never—" He cleared his throat. "Clara Matthews, I know we have only known each other a few months. I know we came together through violence and tragedy. I know I am old and scarred and carrying enough damage to sink a ship. Elijah, but I also know that you are the reason I'm still alive. Not just breathing. Alive. You made me want things I thought I would never want again, a home, a family, a future." He held out the ring. "Marry me? Not because we are under siege, not because of legal convenience, but because I love you. Because I want to spend whatever time I have left watching you grow old and gray. Because when I imagine the rest of my life, you are in every single picture." Clara looked at the ring, looked at the man holding it. This mountain of a person who had been gentle with her from the very first moment, who showed her what love was supposed to feel like. She thought about Thomas, about the lies and the love and the complicated grief that would probably never fully fade. Then she thought about the woman she was on that porch, holding a rifle, wondering if she would survive the winter. She was not that woman anymore. She was someone stronger, someone braver, someone who fought for her home and won, someone who deserved to be happy. Yes, the word was simple. But it changed everything. Elijah slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it was always meant to be there. They married in the cabin, the same cabin where Thomas brought her as a bride, the same cabin where Elijah saved her from the cold. Mama Jenkins served as witness. A circuit preacher performed the ceremony. It was small, simple, perfect. "You may kiss the bride." Elijah bent down, a long way down, and kissed her with all the tenderness he was capable of. Clara Matthews became Clara Stone, and the widow was no more. 6 months later, Clara stood on the porch in the golden light of autumn. Her hand rested on her belly, which had begun to curve with new life. Elijah was in the south pasture, teaching a group of young ranch hands, former outlaws mostly. Boys like Billy, who never had a chance. He had given them work, purpose, a reason to stay on the right side of the law. Clara watched him and marveled at the change. This man who came to her farm hunting vengeance now built instead of destroyed. He planted instead of burned. He saved instead of killed. Love did that. Not always, not for everyone, but sometimes. Sometimes it was enough. Elijah climbed the porch steps, dusty and tired from the day's work. He kissed Clara's forehead, then dropped to his knees and kissed her belly. How is our future troublemaker? Active. I think she has your temper. She? Feeling. Mama Jenkins says her predictions are never wrong. Elijah laughed, that surprised, delighted laugh that still caught Clara off guard sometimes. A daughter. His voice was thick with emotion. Clara. I never thought... I know. She pulled him up, wrapped her arms around his neck. Neither did I. They stood together watching the sun set over their land. The land Clara almost lost. The land Thomas died protecting. The land that was now the foundation of a new life. The widow was never the same again, Clara murmured. What? Nothing, just something I was thinking about. She leaned into Elijah's warmth and smiled. The woman who stood on this porch a year ago was alone, afraid, fighting just to survive another day. She had a dead husband's secrets, a crumbling homestead, and no idea that a giant stranger would ride out of the mountains and change everything. Now she had a home, a family, a future. She had love. Clara took Elijah's hand and placed it on her belly, where their daughter kicked strong. Come inside, she said. I want to show you something. What? The rest of our lives. And together, hand in hand. They walked into their home. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.